It was one of those blistering California summer days when the sunlight seemed to shimmer on the pavement like glass, and the air carried the sticky scent of cotton candy, sunscreen, and concrete. Families from every corner of the country swarmed into Disneyland, laughter and squeals merging into an unrelenting hum of joy and chaos. The Martinez family had driven all the way from Albuquerque for this trip. 2 parents, 1 teenage boy, and a quiet little girl who never quite fit in with the noise of the world. Lila Martinez was 8 years old. She wasn't like the other kids her age, didn't throw tantrums for souvenirs or beg for churros every 20 steps. She was observant, always watching. Her dark eyes seemed to drink in the colors, the lights, the faces. She clung to her older brother Danny's side for most of the day, except when something really drew her in, and that something was the King Arthur carousel. She'd ridden it 3 times already, and each time she seemed to fall deeper under its spell. The carved horses with their gilded saddles, the tinkling music that seemed like it came from a music box lost in time, it all fascinated her. On the 4th ride, while her parents grabbed snacks and Danny stood bored by a trash can, she spun around, laughing, her small fingers gripping the pole of a white horse with a pink ribbon on its mane. When the ride ended, Lila hopped down and ran toward Danny, cheeks flushed with delight. "That was the last one, promise," she said, breathless. Danny rolled his eyes. "Good. Mom and Dad are getting tired." Lila looked up at him, eyes suddenly serious. "I need to go to the bathroom. I saw one near the popcorn stand." Danny glanced toward it, saw a small line of stalls not too far off. He nodded. "Okay, hurry, I'll be right here." She nodded and darted off. That was the last time anyone saw her. At first, Danny didn't panic. He played a game on his phone. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Still no sign of Lila. He called for her, walked toward the bathrooms, checked inside. Nothing. No one had seen her. He started running. By the time their parents arrived, the world had tilted sideways. Park security moved fast. Radios chirped. Staff closed off exits. Guests were asked to remain where they were. Announcements were made in calm voices, just vague enough not to incite fear. Police were called in. Sniffer dogs. Volunteers. Parents held their children tighter. Surveillance footage was reviewed. They found Lila, briefly. She was seen walking alone, heading in the direction of the bathroom. Then, nothing. She disappeared right after passing the exit gate of the carousel. No footage showed her entering the restroom. No footage showed her leaving the area. It was as if the air had swallowed her whole. The footage became national news within 48 hours. The smiling face of Lila Martinez, missing teeth, dimples, straight black hair spread across every screen. Interviews with her tearful parents played on every major network. True crime podcasts speculated wildly. Was it a kidnapping, a human trafficking ring, a Disneyland cover-up? Theories were endless. Some even blamed her parents. Others accused park staff or claimed the cameras had been tampered with. Disneyland denied all wrongdoing, expressing their deepest sympathies and pledging full cooperation with the authorities. But the search led nowhere. No ransom note, no clothing, no witnesses, no Lila. Days turned to weeks. The Martinez family stayed in California for nearly 3 months, clinging to every possible lead. Psychics called in. Detectives were hired. Not a single clue surfaced. She had vanished in broad daylight from the happiest place on earth. Eventually, public interest faded. Another missing child took the headlines, then another. The Martinez family returned home without their daughter. Disneyland removed extra security signs, restored regular crowd flow, and carried on with business as usual. But not everyone moved on. 14 years later, a young man would walk through the gates of Disneyland alone. He would wear a faded baseball cap low over his eyes. He would pause near the carousel and watch the white horse with the pink ribbon circle slowly in the midday sun. His name was Danny Martinez, and he had never stopped searching for his sister. If you're captivated by the mystery of Lila Martinez's disappearance, don't forget to subscribe for more gripping real-life stories. There's more to this one than you could ever imagine. The moment Lila's mother screamed her name, sharp, desperate, unfiltered, It sliced through the carousel's music and scattered the cheerful air like broken glass. Javier Martinez was already running, his heart pounding with dread before he even knew why. Danny, pale and breathless, met them halfway and tried to explain, words tripping over each other. "She said she was going to the bathroom," he stammered, pointing. "She never came back." Rosa clutched at her chest, dizzy with panic, and shouted her daughter's name again. Heads turned. Park employees rushed over. One of them, a young woman in a blue vest, tried to stay calm as she guided the family to a nearby security kiosk. Within minutes, the park's emergency protocol was activated. Radios came alive with chatter. Security guards spread out in every direction. Every employee on shift received Lila's description and photo. 8 years old, shoulder-length black hair, white t-shirt with a rainbow, denim shorts, light-up sneakers. The park wasn't officially closed, but exits were discreetly sealed. Cast members at the gates received orders to delay departures, citing a technical malfunction. Guests murmured and speculated, some annoyed, others sensing something was wrong. But for the Martinez family, time was unraveling. 2 hours passed. Aerial drones were deployed to scan the park's exterior, while sniffer dogs were brought into the interior zones. Disneyland cooperated with Anaheim police, who arrived with full teams, urging calm and discretion but moving with urgency. They pulled security footage from every available camera near the carousel and restrooms. That's when things took a darker turn. On the surveillance video, Lila was seen leaving the ride area alone. She was walking calmly, weaving through small crowds, moving toward the restrooms just as Danny said. And then, she was gone. No footage of her entering the bathroom. No footage of her turning back. She simply disappeared after passing the exit point. Detectives went frame by frame. They looked for anyone following her, any distraction or irregularity. There was none. 1 second she was there, next she wasn't. Cameras covering the area showed no blind spots, no obvious tampering, but Lila never reappeared on any angle. It was as if she had dissolved into air. By evening, the search escalated to a full-on lockdown. Guests were now being told to remain in designated zones. Some were escorted to holding areas. Tension rippled across the park. Whispers of a missing child spread like wildfire. Rumors turned into posts. Social media lit up. Find Lila trended nationally by nightfall. Outside the park gates, reporters gathered. News vans lined the streets. A helicopter hovered above Sleeping Beauty Castle, casting moving shadows on the pavement below. Interviews with frantic parents aired on live television. Police issued statements, assuring the public they were doing everything possible. The Martinez family was kept in a quiet conference room backstage. Javier paced like a caged animal. Rosa clutched a park map, tears soaking the edges. Danny sat in the corner, trembling, repeating to himself, "She said she'd be right back." Detectives asked questions. What was Lila like? Would she talk to strangers? Was she scared of being alone? Had she acted strangely that day? The family answered as best they could, their minds fogged with disbelief and pain. Midnight came and went. The park, now empty, was searched inch by inch. Janitors lifted grates. Technicians opened access hatches. Divers checked the shallow waters of the moat. Every locker, trash bin, and maintenance tunnel was inspected. Still nothing. By dawn, police expanded the perimeter. Amber alerts flashed across California highways. Checkpoints were set up around Anaheim, but there were no witnesses, no ransom calls, no trace. Volunteers poured in by the hundreds. Locals offered drones, dogs, boots, hands. They distributed flyers and combed nearby streets. Disneyland released a public statement expressing sympathy and full cooperation, but offered no new information. Critics accused them of withholding details. As the hours turned to days, media coverage intensified. TV anchors dissected the timeline. Commentators speculated. Was it a kidnapping? An inside job? Was there a failure in park security? Some blamed the parents. Others pointed fingers at Disneyland staff. Conspiracy theories blossomed, but none of them had Lila. Back in Albuquerque, neighbors held candlelight vigils. Churches prayed. Her bedroom remained untouched. Danny stopped speaking to most people. His parents barely spoke to each other. The case turned colder with each passing week, and as summer faded, the world slowly began to move on. But the Martinez family never would. The months following Lila's disappearance were a blur of dread and exhaustion, a looping nightmare that the Martinez family couldn't escape. The search never truly ended, but the spotlight began to dim. Reporters stopped showing up, donations dwindled, leads dried up, and what remained was silence. Dense, suffocating silence. Rosa Martinez fell into herself. Her once vibrant energy, always organizing school events and neighborhood gatherings, dissipated into numbness. She stopped cooking, stopped laughing, spent hours sitting in Lila's room, brushing her daughter's hair on a doll that no longer had a face. Grief made her quiet, then cold. Javier Martinez, once a steady man who worked in auto repair and always kept things together, began spiraling. First came the anger, at the police, at Disneyland, at the strangers online who accused him of being negligent. Then came the obsession. He built corkboards in their garage, covered them with maps, timelines, printouts of conspiracy forums. Strings connected nothing to nowhere. He'd sit for hours, staring, eyes glassy, always looking for a detail he'd missed. Danny, only 11 at the time, was left to orbit the collapse of his family like a forgotten moon. No one really saw how much guilt he carried. He was the last person to see her, the one who'd said, "Okay, hurry," and went back to playing on his phone. He stopped eating regularly, started talking less. Kids at school whispered behind his back. They moved houses eventually. Not out of choice, but necessity. Too many memories, too many reporters on the lawn, too many empty nights staring at Lila's door. They sold the old home at a loss. The new place was smaller, quieter, lifeless. Therapy was suggested by multiple people. They tried. A few sessions here and there, but no amount of counseling could reach where they were buried. They didn't want to heal, not if it meant letting go. 3 years in, Javier lost his job. He spent too many nights arguing online, posting rants accusing the park of running a cover-up, claiming there were secret tunnels, security failures. People paid off to stay silent. He was banned from several forums and blocked by families of other missing children. But he kept going, convinced that something evil had happened in that park, something no one wanted exposed. Rosa began attending church again. Sometimes she'd stay for hours after service, sitting in the pews long after everyone left. She'd light candles for Lila, speak to no one. Occasionally she'd vanish for hours without telling anyone where she'd gone. Danny once found her at a gas station miles from town, sitting in the car staring at a photo. Danny got older. His hair darkened, his face hardened. He made it through middle school and high school, but barely. Teachers described him as present but distant. He didn't go to prom, didn't apply to college. He worked part-time at a grocery store, saved money, lived with headphones always on, eyes somewhere far off. He never told anyone about the recurring dream. In it, he was back at the park, standing in front of the carousel. Everything was frozen, like a painting. Except for one thing, Lila's horse, the one with the pink ribbon. It kept spinning faster and faster until the ribbon unraveled, floated into the air and vanished into the sky. He'd wake up sweating, heart pounding, always with the same thought echoing in his mind. She's still there. Sometimes late at night he'd open Google Maps and scroll through satellite images of Disneyland, trying to trace paths from the carousel to every possible nearby structure. He downloaded park blueprints, scoured Reddit posts, contacted ex-cast members using fake profiles. His parents didn't know. They didn't ask. Conversations in the house were minimal, functional. Birthdays passed in silence. Holidays became days to sleep through. The Martinez family existed like ghosts, all living in the shadow of one vanished girl. On the 14th anniversary, Rosa placed a single white rose on the sidewalk near the local church. Javier printed a fresh batch of flyers and posted them on telephone poles, even though no one looked anymore. Danny didn't go to work that day. Instead, he booked a one-way bus ticket to Anaheim. He had no plan, no permission, just a burning need that had lived inside him for nearly half his life. He packed a backpack with a flashlight, a copy of Lila's last known photo, and a folded-up map of Disneyland. He was going back, not to ride the carousel, to find what everyone else had given up on. Danny Martinez had grown into a quiet storm of a man, tall, lean, always watching. 14 years had not healed the wound. They had only turned it into something sharp and calculated. He lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in East Albuquerque, surrounded by stacks of binders, printouts, and hand-drawn sketches. Where other young men his age chased careers or relationships, Danny chased shadows. He didn't talk much about his sister, but she was everywhere. Her photo, smiling, frozen at 8, hung beside his bed. Her laugh echoed faintly in the back of his mind when the house was silent. He hadn't gone back to Disneyland since the day she vanished, but he knew its layout better than most employees ever had. He'd spent years collecting pieces, park blueprints from public records, leaked maps from former workers, rumors on obscure forums. He watched YouTube walkthroughs of every ride, studied visitor vlogs, and memorized guest complaints posted online. Patterns began to emerge, inconsistencies, areas with blind spots, rides with backstage access that didn't appear on any official diagram. Danny became obsessed with the underground tunnels rumored to run beneath the park. Some said they were part of old utility corridors dating back to the 1960s. Others believed they were staff-only passageways for movement unseen by guests. But every attempt to confirm them ran into dead ends. Official sources denied their existence. Disney fan groups shut down discussion threads mysteriously fast. He started reaching out to ex-employees under aliases. Some ignored him. Others warned him to stop asking. But a few hinted at things they weren't supposed to talk about. Doors behind rides that led nowhere, rooms that no longer existed, cleaning crews reassigned with no explanation. One contact, who claimed to have worked in maintenance a decade ago, told him to look at the carousel again. Not the ride itself, but what was beneath it. He said there was once a service hatch there, now welded shut. No one was supposed to go down there, the man wrote. That's all I can say. Just be careful. Danny printed the email and pinned it above his desk. For months he planned the return. He worked extra shifts to save money. He bought a second-hand camera with infrared and low-light modes. He studied trespassing laws, memorized the park's crowd patterns, mapped out routes from the carousel to every nearby structure. He didn't tell his parents he was going. Rosa would worry herself sick. Javier would insist on joining. But this wasn't about comfort or closure. It was about truth. The night before he left, he sat in silence, staring at a small box he kept locked beneath his bed. Inside were 3 things: the last birthday card Lila had given him, her favorite hair clip, and a page torn from a storybook they used to read together. He ran his fingers over the page. "If you're ever lost, just follow the sound of your heart," it read. The bus ride to Anaheim was long and uneventful. He stared out the window, watching landscapes blur by, but his mind was fixed on one image: the King Arthur carousel spinning under the California sun, just as it had the day she vanished. When he arrived, he checked into a cheap motel 5 miles from the park. He spent the night reviewing his notes, cross-referencing coordinates and adjusting the straps on his hidden gear bag. His heart thudded like a drum, not with fear but with urgency. The next morning he walked through the gates of Disneyland. Everything looked the same: tourists with mouse ears, children laughing, couples taking selfies. The colors were bright, the music cheerful, the illusion perfect. But beneath the surface, Danny felt it, like a current under calm water. Something wrong. He moved carefully, avoiding attention. He circled the carousel 3 times, watching every movement, every shadow. He took slow, deliberate steps toward the area where Lila had disappeared, noting the camera angles, the line of sight, the exits, and then he saw it. Behind a low hedge near a maintenance door partly obscured by signage and fake stonework, there was a panel. Faded, rusted at the edges, not part of the guest area, marked with an old code he recognized from a map: Service Access 12B. He stood very still. For the first time in years, he felt closer to her, closer than anyone had been since the day she vanished. Danny kept his distance from the panel for the rest of the day. He knew better than to act on impulse. Disneyland was heavily monitored. Cameras weren't always visible, and staff were trained to notice lingering behavior. He blended in, bought a soda, snapped photos like a tourist, and made mental notes. Every detail mattered: the angle of the hedge, how often staff passed by, the direction guests usually walked. By sunset, he had memorized the rhythms. That night, he returned to his motel and laid everything out on the bed. Flashlight, gloves, a printed park schematic, his phone with encrypted backups of his research, a small toolkit. He felt the weight of it, not the gear, but the moment. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was confrontation. He waited until midnight. Then, dressed in black and moving like shadow, he slipped out. Scaling the perimeter of Disneyland wasn't simple, but Danny had done his homework. He entered through an older maintenance alley, avoided patrol routes, and made his way to the carousel from the backside. The moon was low, hidden behind clouds, and the silence of the empty park was eerie. The laughter, the music, the energy, all of it gone. What remained felt hollow. Reaching the hedge, he crouched low, heart pounding so loud he thought it might echo. He examined the panel again. It was metal, cold to the touch, and locked with a rusted latch. Danny used a thin tool to wedge it open, careful not to snap the old hinge. It groaned faintly as it moved, behind it darkness and a steep drop, just wide enough for a human to fit through. He lowered himself in. The air changed instantly, cooler, denser, and laced with the smell of rust and mildew. He turned on his flashlight and found himself in a narrow corridor lined with pipes. Graffiti marked the walls, old and faded. Crew tags, dates, strange symbols. It was clear this space hadn't been used in years. Danny moved slowly, light scanning every step. Cobwebs hung like curtains. Rodent droppings speckled the corners, but deeper in something shifted. A sound, he froze. It was faint, almost imperceptible. A hollow hum, like wind moving through a bottle, or like air through vents. He followed it. The tunnel narrowed, then split. To the left was a dead end filled with rusted cleaning equipment. To the right, a metal grate sat embedded in the floor. It looked like a vent shaft. He crouched beside it, peering down. And that's when he saw it. Stuck between two slats coated in dust and age was a child's shoe. He reached for it, carefully dislodging it without breaking the fabric. The moment it came loose, he sat back, heart racing. It was small, worn, pale pink. On the heel, barely visible through grime, was a faded Mickey Mouse sticker, peeling but unmistakable. He knew that shoe. His hands trembled as he held it under the flashlight. It was Lila's, no doubt. He remembered her fighting to wear that exact pair every day, even when they didn't match her clothes. Their mum had written her name inside one of them in black marker. He flipped it over, wiped the sole. There it was. El Martinez. The breath left his lungs. He stared at it, emotion crashing over him like a wave. Grief, fury, disbelief. For 14 years, nothing. No sign, no closure. And now, hidden in the underbelly of the place where she disappeared, her shoe. Danny stood there for a long time, just holding it. The vent beneath led deeper, but he didn't move forward. Not yet. He took photos, placed the shoe carefully in his backpack. Then, retracing his steps, he exited the tunnel before dawn. Back in his motel room, he washed the dust off his hands and stared at the shoe resting on the table. All those years, all the pain, the questions. Something had finally broken through the silence. He wasn't crazy, he wasn't chasing ghosts. Lila had been there, and now so was he. The next morning, Danny didn't go back to the park. He sat in his motel room, staring at the shoe as daylight filtered through the thin curtains. He couldn't risk damaging it. Instead, he wrapped it carefully in a towel, placed it in a shoebox, and drove straight to the Anaheim Police Department. He told them everything. At first, they were skeptical. 14 years had passed. A man walking in off the street, claiming to have found a child's shoe in a sealed utility shaft beneath Disneyland, wasn't exactly standard procedure. But then he showed them the photo, the sticker, the name. The officer on duty froze. Within hours, the item was in evidence. A special forensics team was assigned. Danny gave a full statement, how he got into the park where the panel was, what route he took. He held nothing back. He didn't care if they charged him with trespassing. All that mattered now was truth. They told him not to get his hopes up, but by evening the lab called back. The shoe was authentic. DNA swabs taken from the insole produced trace organic material, likely sweat or skin cells. Partial degradation was expected, but it was enough. It matched the existing samples on file from Lila Martinez's original case. Danny's heart stopped when he heard the words, confirmed familial match. 14 years, and now, indisputable proof, she had been there. The news spread fast. The Anaheim PD announced the reopening of the Martinez case. Local outlets picked it up first, then national media. Reporters camped outside the police station and the park entrance. The phrase tunnel vent discovery became the new obsession across social platforms. Experts and armchair sleuths resurfaced, offering theories, timelines, and demands for answers. Danny refused interviews. He wasn't interested in spectacle. Disneyland, now under intense public pressure, released a carefully worded statement. We are cooperating fully with authorities and remain committed to the safety and well-being of all guests. We extend our deepest sympathies to the Martinez family. But it wasn't enough. Advocacy groups called for transparency. Questions flooded forums and news shows. Why wasn't this tunnel ever investigated? Why was the hatch still accessible? How did no one find the shoe until now? Danny kept quiet. Instead, he returned home to Albuquerque for the first time in years. When he walked through the front door, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, hands folded, as if she'd been waiting. Javier stood beside her, holding the flyer of Lila he had reprinted every year. No one spoke at first. Then Rosa slowly stood and reached out. Danny handed her the shoebox. She opened it, saw the worn pink sneaker, and gasped. No sound, just breath. Her knees gave way, and Javier caught her before she fell. There were no words for what they felt, no phrases capable of holding that much grief and relief, horror and vindication all tangled together. For the first time in over a decade, they held something real. Later that evening, an investigator flew in to brief them. The case would be re-examined with modern technology. Forensic teams were being assembled. Access to underground structures at Disneyland was being reclassified. Search crews would be deployed to map previously sealed areas. Danny asked one question. What happens now? The detective paused. We follow the trail, he said, and we hope it leads us somewhere. Danny nodded. He knew the trail was deeper than anyone realized. The media frenzy only intensified. Talk shows debated Disney's liability. Online detectives combed over old maps. Reddit lit up with new threads, dissecting every known tunnel, ride, and access hatch. But none of it mattered to Danny unless it brought real answers. One night, alone in his room, he opened a message from a burner email account. It had no subject line, just one sentence inside. You were never supposed to find that. There was no name, no reply option, no trace. Danny stared at the screen, pulse racing. The world thought this was a breakthrough, but something in that message chilled him deeper than the tunnels ever had, because it meant someone was still watching. The Anaheim Police Department held a press conference 2 days later. The room was packed, every seat filled, cameras pointed, microphones extended like weapons. The lead investigator confirmed what many feared, but hadn't dared say out loud. The shoe found by Danny Martinez was genuine, the DNA match irrefutable. Lila Martinez had, at some point, been inside a tunnel beneath Disneyland. The case, they said, was no longer cold. Danny stood in the back, hands in his jacket pockets, jaw clenched. He didn't want to be part of the spectacle, but the detective had asked him to come. You deserve to hear this, he'd said. What followed was a storm. The shoe was tested again, this time under tighter protocols. Results were identical. The park, under increasing scrutiny, was subpoenaed for all internal structural records dating back 20 years. The public wanted access to everything: blueprints, tunnel maps, maintenance logs, employee records. Disney's legal team pushed back. They cited guest safety, corporate confidentiality, outdated construction data, but public outrage swelled. Protesters showed up at park entrances holding signs. "Where is the truth and justice for Lila?" Danny received hundreds of messages. Some were supportive. Others accused him of faking the shoe, but one message in particular caught his attention. A reply to a Reddit post he hadn't made himself. It read, "He's not wrong about the tunnels. I used to clean them. Some weren't even on the maps." He sent a private message asking to talk. No response, but the investigation pressed forward. Police teams, along with forensic specialists, were granted controlled access to the area where Danny had entered. The panel had been resealed, but under order, it was opened again. Inside, they followed his exact path, down the narrow shaft, through the corridor to the vent where the shoe had been lodged. They confirmed it all. Then something else happened. A second corridor was discovered, partially blocked by debris. Behind it, a narrow access tunnel extended toward the older sections of the park, sections closed off for decades. What they found inside sent ripples through the department. Rusting pipes, abandoned maintenance gear, old signage with dates from the early 1980s, and faint, barely legible markings on the concrete walls, names, initials, and dates, including one that read LM 2009, scratched deep into the stone. It was enough. The case took on new classification, possible abduction with extended concealment. Specialized units were brought in. Disneyland was now obligated to disclose all employee records from the week of Lila's disappearance. The files were incomplete, missing time cards, absent security reports. But one name caught attention. A janitor listed on the schedule for that day had clocked in, but there was no record of him clocking out. Eli Barrett. He was 34 years old in 2009, employed by a third-party maintenance contractor, worked the evening shift, assigned to the carousel zone. His record ended abruptly. No termination. No transfer, just silence. Danny heard the name in a briefing and felt something tighten in his chest. He asked to see the photo attached to the old file. The man's eyes were hollow, thin face, pale skin, patchy beard. Not someone you'd remember, not someone you'd notice. Which made him perfect, Danny realized. Detectives tried to trace him. But Eli Barrett had vanished from records just weeks after Lila's disappearance. His apartment was vacated, his bank account closed. No social security activity since 2010. It was as if he'd evaporated. The media ran with it. Was this the man who took Lila? Had he used the hidden tunnels to move through the park unnoticed? Was he still alive? Danny watched the news coverage from home, the glow of the screen painting shadows on his face. Everyone was finally asking the right questions, but one thought haunted him above all. What if Eli wasn't the only one? What if the tunnels weren't just old service paths? What if they were used for something else entirely? The search was far from over. And the answers were buried deeper than anyone had dared dig. The investigation widened. What had begun as a single missing child case was now reopening long-forgotten sections of one of the most famous places on Earth. The Anaheim police, with support from federal consultants, requested full access to all historical documents related to Disneyland's original construction. Reluctantly, and under mounting public pressure, Disney turned them over. What they found confirmed long-suspected rumors. There were tunnels. Not just the well-known utility corridors beneath Tomorrowland and Main Street. Those were mapped and sanitized for PR purposes. These were different, older. Some traced back to early renovations in the late 50s and early 60s. They were never intended for guest use, only for internal operations, quick movement, and emergency protocols. But not all of them were properly documented. Several blueprints contained edits, sections drawn, then scribbled out. Access points labeled but later marked as sealed or decommissioned. Construction memos referenced changes that didn't align with physical layout. Entire zones had been bricked up and forgotten. Investigators interviewed dozens of former employees, especially those who had worked in maintenance or custodial services. Most gave vague recollections, dusty passageways, odd noises, unlit corridors. But a few spoke clearly on the condition of anonymity. One man who claimed to have worked graveyard shifts in the early 2000s described entering a tunnel beneath the carousel during a plumbing repair. He said the route extended deeper than expected, and halfway through, he found a locked metal gate with no key and no explanation. Another worker remembered being told to ignore odd spaces in the maintenance map. There were places we weren't supposed to clean, he said, not for safety reasons, just not our job. Danny took notes obsessively. He created new overlays of the park, cross-referencing every known access point with areas where Lila could have vanished. He highlighted blind spots, electrical closets, and backstage doors near the carousel. The picture became clear. The infrastructure existed to hide someone, and if Eli Barrett had known the layout, if he'd worked that shift with keys, with time, with a plan, he could have taken Lila without anyone noticing. But the most disturbing discovery came not from interviews but from a retired contractor's storage unit in Riverside. There, buried beneath decades of tools and rusted parts, was a stack of original maintenance records and repair logs. One binder listed inspections conducted after unauthorized internal access events. The dates spanned the late 1980s through early 2000s. Some incidents were marked with handwritten notes like "contained," "no police," and "shift reassigned." There was no mention of specific employees, no names, just dates, locations, and cryptic annotations. One entry stood out: June 19, 2009, Area 12B. Reported movement. Resolved. No guest contact. That was the day Lila disappeared. Danny read it again and again, heart thundering. No guest contact. The implication was clear. Something had happened in the tunnel. It was seen, noted, but buried. Disney's official response: those were legacy documents, potentially incomplete and not reflective of current operations. But the damage was done. Public trust eroded rapidly. Protesters now gathered daily. Former employees began organizing online, sharing memories of being told to stay silent, of co-workers who quit suddenly or were reassigned after unusual activity. One man recalled a janitor who stopped showing up for work right after a child went missing. He couldn't remember the name, but Danny already knew: Eli Barrett. The deeper investigators dug, the more they found evidence of systemic negligence and possibly deliberate concealment. The question was no longer if something terrible had happened in the tunnels. It was how far it had gone. A theory emerged among the task force that certain hidden spaces beneath the park had been used, not officially, not by design, but by individuals with access, perhaps even for nefarious purposes, and that over the years anomalies were ignored because confronting them meant destroying the illusion. Danny couldn't sleep. He kept seeing that shoe, kept wondering how long it had been there, if someone had tried to hide it, if it had fallen during a chase, or if, just maybe, Lila had left it behind herself, trying to mark a trail. Every door they opened led to more questions, but Danny didn't care how dark it got. He was finally inside the labyrinth, and he wasn't leaving until he found the truth. The deeper authorities dug, the more rot they uncovered beneath the surface, and what began as whispers turned into damning testimony. A former Disneyland security supervisor, recently retired and no longer under contract, came forward anonymously. His voice was distorted on camera, his identity shielded, but his words landed like thunder. There were always things that didn't add up, he said. Missing logs, shifts that didn't exist on paper, employees who suddenly disappeared, not just left, but wiped. And every time someone asked questions, they were either moved or silenced. Danny watched the interview twice, then a third time. The timeline was matching what he'd pieced together himself. Employees vanishing, tunnels ignored, secrecy embedded in the foundation. Public pressure hit a boiling point. Under legal compulsion, Disneyland was forced to release internal HR documentation from the late 2000s. It was heavily redacted. Names blacked out, notes vague. But one file stood out, a line entry noting the termination of subcontractor affiliation dated July 2, 2009. It referenced no incident, no complaint, no process. Danny filed a request for more information. He was denied. But the detective working the case wasn't. A week later, he called Danny with an update. "The name you asked about? Eli Barrett. He was listed in that redacted file. Quiet termination, no explanation, and his records deleted from payroll systems 2 weeks later." Danny's breath caught. "There's more," the detective continued. "We traced an old background check on him from before he was hired. And it raised flags that should have been caught. Eli Barrett had a sealed juvenile record, inaccessible to the public, but viewable to law enforcement. Multiple reports of trespassing, an accusation of attempted abduction that never led to charges, institutionalization at age 17, followed by a string of short-term jobs under aliases. None of it stopped him from working at Disneyland. Danny felt sick, not because Barrett had slipped through the cracks, but because the cracks had been ignored on purpose. Later that week, another whistleblower surfaced. This time, it was a former HR contractor who had handled third-party staffing. She described being asked to make certain files disappear. She said Barrett's name came up once, flagged during a background check, but someone in management overrode the concern. "I was told to push it through, that it was handled," she said. Danny now knew for sure Barrett didn't fall through the system, he was ushered through it, and still Barrett had never been found. Detectives searched for any trace, tax records, DMV activity, hospital visits. Nothing. It was as if he'd never existed after 2010. But Danny wasn't convinced he was dead. He felt it in his bones. Barrett was out there, hiding, watching. He started getting anonymous messages again. Some were blank, others contained one sentence, always in the same format. "Stop digging. You're wasting your time. You think you want answers, but you don't." Each time Danny saved them, traced their headers. They came from different IPs, always routed through VPNs, always untraceable. One night, he received something different, a file. It contained a scan of an old, crumpled Disneyland security incident report dated June 19, 2009. Most of it was faded, but a few lines were clear. "Suspicious individual reported near Area 12B. Description vague. Radio communication lost for 14 minutes. No follow-up logged. Shift supervisor replaced week after." Danny read it over and over. 14 minutes. Just enough time for something to happen. Just enough time for someone to vanish, and someone else to pretend they never saw it. He forwarded the file to the detective, who confirmed its authenticity. "It was never in the official archive," he said. "Someone removed it deliberately." Danny sat alone in the dark that night, his mind racing. Someone had watched Lila. Someone had followed her. Someone had taken her. And then someone else had made sure no one ever found out, but they hadn't expected Danny to keep looking. They hadn't counted on a brother who never let go. And now, after years of silence, the whole system was starting to crack, and beneath the surface the truth was preparing to rise. Danny returned to Anaheim with a single goal: to go deeper. He didn't wait for official channels anymore. The investigation was moving, but too slowly. Bureaucracy was cautious. Danny wasn't. He had enough knowledge now, maps, timestamps, structural plans, to navigate where others feared to look. And more importantly, he had resolve hardened by years of silence. He wore black again, moved at night, and entered the park through the same maintenance alley as before. This time he wasn't aiming for the vent. He was heading for the blocked tunnel beyond it, the one authorities had only partially cleared. Danny brought new tools: a compact crowbar, a headlamp, gloves, his phone, preloaded with notes and a secure backup. He moved quickly through the familiar shaft, past the vent where he'd found the shoe, and toward the tunnel that had been walled with rusted shelving and debris. He began clearing it. Piece by piece, he pulled apart the obstruction: old carts, broken signs, twisted metal once used to secure fencing. The deeper he dug, the more he uncovered signs of forgotten space. Paint peeled from the walls. A maintenance sign, faded but legible, read "Auxiliary Access Zone B." He knew what that meant. Unmapped territory. Finally, the last barrier fell away. The air inside was colder, thicker. His light cut through the darkness, revealing a tight corridor that sloped downward. Water dripped from overhead pipes. A discarded mop, long fossilized in dust, leaned against the wall. Danny moved slowly, every step echoing louder than he liked. 30 yards in, he reached a metal hatch. It was bolted shut, but old, weakened by time. With effort, he pried it open. Beyond it lay a space unlike anything he'd seen before. It wasn't just a tunnel. It was a room, low ceiling, walls lined with outdated equipment, a rusted control panel, and a storage unit with shelves that had collapsed. At the far end was a narrow hallway, and just beyond that something that stopped him cold. A backpack, small, purple, faded. He recognized it instantly. It was Lila's. He knelt, breath shaking, and opened the zipper. Inside were things that made his stomach drop: a broken flashlight, 2 wrappers from candy they'd bought that day, and a laminated park map with smeared edges. No blood, no clothing, just remnants, signs of survival. But more than that, signs that she had been there, alive, after she vanished. 100 questions pounded his mind. How long had she been here? Did she escape? Was someone keeping her down here? Why didn't anyone search this far? Danny rose and followed the hallway. It twisted once, then led to another room, smaller, lined with pipes and old junction boxes. On the wall someone had carved deep scratches into the paint. 4 vertical lines, then a 5th, slashed across them. Counting days. Danny stepped back, heart in his throat. She had been trapped. Suddenly, a sound. Not loud, not clear, but unmistakable. A hum. He turned off his light, listened. It came from a vent above, one that ran upward toward the main park. It wasn't a machine, it was a vibration. Airflow. Somewhere something mechanical was still operating, moving air from the depths to the surface. And then a voice. Faint, far away, unintelligible. Danny froze. Someone else was down here. He backed into the corner, breath held. Nothing moved for a moment, just silence, and the hum, and that distant sound, so far off it could have been imagination. But he trusted his instincts. He wasn't alone. He turned, moved swiftly, retraced his steps. No running, no panic, just purpose. Back through the hatch, through the corridor, out past the debris. When he emerged into open air again, his chest heaved with breath. He didn't sleep that night. He wrote everything down. Every item, every marking, every second of what he found. He contacted the detective and gave them coordinates. But what he didn't say, not yet, was that someone had been there. Or worse, still was. Danny hadn't spoken to his therapist in over a year, but after what he'd seen in the tunnels, something inside him shifted. It wasn't just about Lila anymore. It was about memory, his own. Things he had buried, moments he'd tried to forget. Because if Lila had been trapped beneath that park, then maybe Danny had seen more than he realized. Maybe he'd seen it happen. He returned to therapy not for healing, but for unlocking. His new therapist, Dr. Corinne Adams, specialized in childhood trauma and memory retrieval. She approached him gently, never forcing detail, but always guiding him toward the edge of what he couldn't quite remember. "It's not that your brain forgot," she told him. "It's that it protected you. Trauma creates walls." Danny nodded. "Then help me knock them down." They worked slowly. Images surfaced in fragments. A man standing too close behind them in line. Lila glancing nervously over her shoulder. A smell. Grease, metal, sweat. Music from the carousel looping endlessly. The warmth of sunlight turning cold too fast. Then it came. In one session, guided by quiet questions, Danny remembered turning to look for Lila after she'd walked off. He saw a shadow moving in the opposite direction of the bathroom. Not a guest, someone in uniform. But not security, not maintenance. He remembered the man's hand gripping Lila's wrist, her face confused, not yet afraid. She didn't scream, didn't resist. She thought he worked there. Danny hadn't processed it at the time. He was a child. The memory hid under layers of guilt, wrapped in denial, but now it surfaced like a gasp from deep water. He described the man's face, pale, thin lips, sunken eyes, longish hair under a cap, facial hair scruffy. Dr. Adams wrote everything down. He told the detective. A sketch artist was brought in. They worked for hours, refining every detail Danny recalled. When the final drawing emerged, the detective placed it beside the old employment photo of Eli Barrett. It was a match. There was no doubt. Danny had seen Lila's abduction, and his brain had buried it for 14 years. The sketch was circulated internally. Law enforcement updated Barrett's wanted file. But with no sign of him in over a decade, they feared he was either dead or still hiding in plain sight under a new identity. Meanwhile, forensic teams were sent into the tunnels based on Danny's coordinates. They confirmed everything: the backpack, the map, the candy wrappers, the wall markings, all preserved in evidence bags, photographed, analyzed, but nothing prepared them for what came next. At the far end of the second hallway, behind a collapsed segment of wall, they uncovered a hidden vent. Small, narrow, angled steeply upward, almost vertical. It had been partially sealed with old wood and rusted brackets, but inside, lodged between pipework and insulation, was something no one expected. Bones. Tiny. Fragile. At first they couldn't tell if they were animal or human. But the shoes nearby told the story. Only one was present. The other had been found 14 years earlier, stuck in the vent shaft near the carousel. Danny received the call from the lead detective personally. "They found her," he said, voice low, respectful. "Remains, clothing, same size, same shoes. DNA confirmation pending, but there's no doubt." Danny didn't speak for several seconds. He felt the world contract, not explode, but collapse, silently. Not hope, not closure, just gravity. His sister had been found, and she had died down there, alone. The detective added, "There are indications she tried to escape, that she made it into the vent herself. She was smart, resourceful, but it looks like she got stuck. It's possible no one heard her. Or no one wanted to." Danny closed his eyes. He imagined her crawling upward, fighting for air, for light, for someone to notice. She'd almost made it. But almost wasn't enough, and for the first time since the nightmare began, Danny cried, not from grief, but from rage. The funeral was private, no press, no crowds. Just family, a closed casket, and the last echoes of a girl who never got to grow up. Lila's remains were laid to rest in Albuquerque, beneath a stone carved simply with her name and the words "loved, missed, found." Danny stood alone after the others had gone, one hand on the headstone, the other clutching the photograph they'd used in every flyer, the same photo he'd stared at for years. She looked so full of life in it, so unaware of what the world could take. He thought that would be the end of it, but grief doesn't follow rules, and neither do stories like this. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at his apartment. No return address, no postage, just an envelope slipped under his door. Danny found it early in the morning, lying on the welcome mat, marked only with his name. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single page, typed. The font was old, the ink faint, the paper smelled like dust and mold, and the first line stopped his breath. "I didn't mean to hurt her." Danny read it twice before continuing. "I just wanted to watch. She wasn't supposed to run. I gave her food. She cried all the time, but I never touched her. She got away. I came back, but she was gone. I looked for her. I swear I did. But the vent was too small. I couldn't reach. I didn't want her to die. I just wanted someone to see me." There was no signature, just a single set of coordinates typed at the bottom. Danny stared at them. He copied them into his phone. They pointed to a sealed section beneath the Matterhorn ride, an area marked off in red on one of the oldest maps he'd ever found. A zone never opened to the public, known only to a handful of contractors and engineers. It had once housed mechanical systems from a discontinued ride decades ago. Later, it was listed as maintenance only. Then, it vanished from all records. He sent the letter to the detective, who verified the paper contained skin oils and DNA from an unknown male. It was too degraded for identification, but not a prank. They ran the coordinates through official records and found blueprints confirming the existence of a sub-basement chamber, long sealed and marked unsafe. No one had accessed it in over 10 years, until now. With a warrant and full safety clearance, a team descended through the foundation of the Matterhorn. The tunnel was cramped, filled with mold and rusted steel. Structural supports groaned under decades of weight. And then they reached the chamber. Inside, the walls were lined with decaying wood panels, a chair, a cracked television, old food wrappers, a mattress molded and torn, children's books, a single doll missing an eye, and on the far wall, taped and yellowed, was a photograph. Lila. Danny wasn't allowed inside until the space was deemed safe, but when he entered, something shifted inside him. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a shrine, a memory frozen in rot. He found more letters in a tin box near the mattress. Ramblings, regret, panic. Pages repeating the phrase, "I didn't mean to hurt her," over and over. There were no fingerprints, no personal documents, no name. But the confession was clear. The man who took Lila had lived here for days, maybe weeks, maybe years, watching the park from below, moving through tunnels, haunting the space beneath Joy. The investigation team concluded that the chamber had likely been accessed after Lila died, but not recently. Maybe by someone revisiting guilt. Maybe by someone still afraid to be seen. Danny didn't feel closure. Not exactly, but he felt gravity. The weight of truth at last uncovered. The story had a villain, but it had more than that. It had layers of failure. People who looked away. People who said nothing. People who chose illusion over accountability. Lila had been seen, but no one had watched closely enough to save her. Danny left the chamber last, his flashlight catching the final words on the back of the letter. "I know what I did, but the park let me do it." And he believed every word. The official excavation began 2 days after the discovery beneath the Matterhorn. The entrance was fortified. Hazmat suits were issued. Specialists from structural engineering and forensic anthropology joined the effort. The space below was unstable, long neglected, riddled with corroded beams and shifting concrete. But they dug. Slowly, carefully, they removed layers of foundation, following the coordinates from the final letter. Beneath one section of collapsed wall, they found the beginning of another corridor, narrower, almost hidden. It sloped downward into what appeared to be a utility crawl space from the park's earliest construction phase. Few had ever seen it, none had documented it, and buried inside, past a curve in the tunnel where even air seemed hesitant to enter, lay a small chamber. There were no doors, no lights, just a pocket of stillness sealed in time. And in the center, partially covered in soil and debris, were skeletal remains, children's size. Beside them, fragments of clothing faded to near colorlessness. A cracked charm bracelet, a lock of hair sealed in what remained of a plastic sandwich bag, and a shoe. The match was immediate. The shoe Danny had found lodged in the vent all those months ago, the same model, the same faded Mickey sticker. The final piece of her story had come to rest here. DNA testing was swift. The confirmation came within 48 hours. It was Lila Martinez. Danny sat in the police station when they told him. The detective didn't speak for long. He just laid the report on the table and gave him space. Danny read every line, every clinical phrase, every cold designation of the truth he already knew. His sister had died underground, but not immediately. The forensic pathologist believed she had survived for several days, possibly even longer, after her disappearance. Scratches on the walls indicated attempts to climb, to crawl, to signal. No trauma was found on the bones, no defensive wounds, no sign of assault. She had likely died from dehydration, alone, trapped, forgotten. Disney issued a formal response that same evening. The statement was precise, legally cautious and emotionally hollow. "We are deeply saddened by the findings related to the Lila Martinez case. While the events occurred many years ago, we understand the profound impact this has had on her family and the community. We remain committed to supporting the ongoing investigation, but the world didn't accept it. The public wanted justice, lawsuits were filed, civil complaints mounted. The Martinez family was offered a private settlement, large, quiet, and designed to make it all disappear. Javier refused. Rosa stayed silent. Danny demanded accountability. not just for Eli Barrett, wherever he was, but for every person who looked away, for every decision that buried tunnels instead of questions. He appeared before the city council, standing under two bright lights, speaking to a room packed with cameras and grief-stricken strangers. He told them what no one else had dared. You built an empire on magic and memory, and when something broke, you covered it with more glitter. My sister died 15 feet beneath your smiling guests, and no one heard her, not because she wasn't loud enough, but because no one was listening. The room fell silent. The video was shared millions of times. And in that moment, Danny wasn't just a brother. He was a mirror to a world that had chosen fantasy over truth. As for the case, the evidence was now overwhelming. Law enforcement confirmed the probable timeline. Lila was abducted by Eli Barrett, moved through restricted access points, hidden in the tunnels, and left in a sealed crawl space when she tried to escape. Whether Barrett panicked or fled intentionally was still unknown, but the confession, the chamber, the remains, they were enough. A nationwide alert was reissued for Eli Barrett. Photos resurfaced. Age-progressed images were circulated. Anonymous tips flooded hotlines. A reward was offered. But he remained a ghost. Danny didn't expect to find him anymore. But he did expect the world to remember. Because Lila had mattered. Not just in her final moments, but always. The manhunt for Eli Barrett intensified. But there were no sightings, no transactions, no trace. The FBI added him to a secondary watch list, just below the nation's most wanted. His name was whispered across forums, debated on talk shows, analyzed by true crime channels. But in every discussion, a darker truth crept forward. Even if Barrett had acted alone, he hadn't operated in a vacuum, and that realization shook the public harder than any single perpetrator could. Investigators unearthed decades of reports previously dismissed or archived without follow-up. Anonymous complaints, disturbances near utility zones, internal memos referencing security lapses that never made it past legal teams, stories from employees who remembered things that felt wrong, but had no power to question. It wasn't a conspiracy in the grand sense, it was something worse. A culture of silence, a system so focused on preservation, of image, of profit, of illusion, that it let shadows grow unchecked beneath its shining surface. Disneyland reached a settlement with the Martinez family. The sum was never disclosed, but what mattered wasn't the money, it was the acknowledgement, the quiet admission that something had gone terribly wrong. Javier, worn and aged by years of torment, gave a single press statement. We didn't want money, we wanted truth. Now the world knows what happened, and they can never forget. Rosa never spoke to the media. She spent her days at the small memorial garden planted outside their home. A patch of earth filled with lilies and forget-me-nots, where a photo of Lila sat surrounded by wind chimes that whispered in the breeze. Danny, however, wasn't finished. He filed a Freedom of Information Act request to obtain full access to every documented failure in Lila's case. It took months, but eventually the records came. He read them all, line by line. Redactions, omissions, contradictions. He compiled them into a report and published it online. It went viral. The document, titled "Below the Magic, a Systemic Failure," detailed every known misstep, every missed opportunity to save his sister. It ended with a single paragraph: "We create fairy tales to give children hope, but we owe them more than stories. We owe them safety, truth, and justice." My sister didn't vanish into thin air, she vanished into neglect. Danny's words echoed far beyond his town. Disney made internal changes, quietly. Staff protocols were overhauled, old tunnels sealed permanently. Background checks for third-party contractors became stricter. But for many it was too little, too late. A year after Lila's remains were found, a candlelight vigil was held in Anaheim. Hundreds came. Parents, survivors, advocates, strangers who had followed her story from the beginning. They carried signs that read, "Lila deserved better, and no more silence." Danny spoke last. He stood beneath the carousel where it all began, the same ride where she had smiled, laughed, and disappeared. His voice didn't shake, it carried. Some people want me to stop telling this story. They say it's over, that we've gotten closure. But closure isn't real, it's just a word people use when they want to forget. I don't want closure. I want accountability. I want memory. I want to make sure no one else slips between the cracks. He paused, then said the words that hung in the air long after the candles went out. I couldn't save her. But I will never stop speaking her name. In the weeks that followed, more families came forward, reporting old incidents, strange encounters, concerns never taken seriously. The story opened a floodgate. Investigations were reopened in other states. Some found answers, others didn't. But Lila's case became a turning point, a reminder that even the most magical places have shadows. And that sometimes a brother's love is the only light strong enough to chase them out. Danny returned home after the vigil. He kept his sister's photo on his nightstand, her hair clipped beside it. And the original flyer, the one he'd taped to every light post for miles, framed above his desk. He still walked past her room sometimes. He still listened for her laugh in dreams. And every time he looked at that carousel horse with the pink ribbon, he remembered, not how she died, but how she lived, and how she fought, even in silence, to be found. 1 year after the vigil, Danny Martinez stood alone at Disneyland, the summer sun warming the park just as it had that day so many years ago. The crowds were as dense as ever. Children tugged their parents toward rides, teens snapped selfies, families shared ice cream cones. Magic was still the currency here. But for Danny, everything felt different. He'd returned not as a searcher, not as an accuser, but as a brother paying his final respects. Somewhere beneath the glitter and music, under the spinning lights and painted horses, his sister's story lingered, etched into the foundation, an invisible truth beneath the fairy tale. He found the small plaque set discreetly into the garden beside the King Arthur carousel. Few guests noticed it. Most passed by, too focused on their own adventure. But Danny saw it. He traced the inscription with his fingers. In memory of Lila Martinez, beloved, brave, never forgotten. He sat on a nearby bench, the same one he'd waited on as a boy, watching the carousel revolve in the golden light. He remembered Lila's smile as she picked out her favorite horse, the one with the pink ribbon. He remembered her laughter, the way she'd wave at him each time she passed. He let the memory live, unspoiled by what came after. For a long time, Danny sat quietly. No crowds, no reporters, no police, just a brother and the echoes of the past. Peace didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, piece by piece, like dawn through thick curtains. There were still bad days, nights when guilt and rage returned. But with each visit, each conversation, each new family that reached out to him for help, he realized something. Lila's story had changed the world, if only by a little. People paid closer attention now. They questioned. They demanded more. The park had changed, and so had its people. Danny stayed in touch with others who had suffered loss. He became a quiet advocate, helping parents navigate the maze of missing persons cases, sharing his story at conferences and vigils. He never sensationalized what happened. He only told the truth, every painful piece of it. He and his parents started speaking again, not as a whole family but as survivors. Rosa still tended her memorial garden. Javier attended every public hearing related to park safety. They never let Lila become just another statistic. On his last visit to the carousel, Danny watched a little girl, no older than Lila had been, choose the horse with the pink ribbon. Her parents waited nearby, laughing as she spun. For a brief moment, Danny smiled. Life moved forward. But memory stayed. He stood up, placed one hand over the plaque and whispered, "I found you." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't an apology. It was simply the truth. Then he walked away, leaving the park behind for good. For everyone who has listened to Lila's story, who's cared enough to hear her name, thank you. These stories matter. These lives matter. We can't always rewrite the past, but we can choose what we do with the truth it leaves behind. If you were moved by Lila's journey, please consider subscribing to our channel for more real-life mysteries and stories that deserve to be heard. Every subscription helps us reach more people, shine a light on more untold stories, and make a difference together. And before you go, don't forget to click the suggested video now on your screen. There's another powerful story waiting for you, just one click away. Because remembering isn't enough. We have to act, to care, and to make sure no one ever vanishes without a voice again. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for helping us keep Lila's memory alive. One story, one truth, one voice at a time.